So I'll just tell everyone just a bit about myself and kind of where I'm coming from in terms of my method, so to speak, for how I put together films these days. I got my first job in television when I was 16, still in high school. I had taken this unique class in high school. It was a radio, film, television class that really it was the one class in my entire life that really changed the direction of my life. And out of that class, um, that class resulted in my first television job. It resulted in some scholarships that got me into a radio program in college. Just a number of things that launched me into media. It's just kind of crazy, but just that one class in high school was the result that really was the spark for where I ended up. And so throughout college and well into my 30s, I worked for uh, television news mainly, where we would be responsible for telling at least one, usually multiple stories daily for the television news. And usually we had to do that in under 2 minutes. Um, and it's quite a challenge to tell a story in 2 minutes. Um, in my mind, it's not enough time to tell a story. It's enough to tell a story about a story. But as time went on, and my ethics kind of changed in my time in television, um, I got into more of the freelance world and started to pick and choose the projects that I was involved with. But always that background of telling a story in a short amount of time has just always been kind of the backbone of what I do, because I did it so much. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of stories that we would have to do, over many years' time, and it kind of becomes second nature to be able to do that type of work once you've done it so many times. And so, kind of, for better or worse these days, when you're on the internet and you're looking at stories, it seems like 4 or 5 minutes is the time span at which they say people lose interest after 5 minutes if you're skimming the internet. And so, to be able to get people's attention and tell a story in that short amount of time, it's a challenge for sure. And there's a lot of purists in the film world that would certainly contend that a 5-minute story is just brushing the surface of something. And yes, it can be, but it's as well, you can get deep with people in 5 minutes or 4 minutes. And so those skills that I learned over the years have kind of come back into play with the way people's attention spans with the internet has morphed. And hopefully over time people's attention spans won't get less and less. It kind of seems like that's where things are going, for better or worse. But for now, that's where we are, and it's also a good place to start if you're interested in filmmaking. Starting with a short is definitely a good place to start, and to be able to get your idea, get a story across in a short amount of time. It's much better biting off small chunks. And as well, when you start considering the hardware of things, everybody these days is doing these stories digitally using electronic equipment. And the longer and more complicated of a documentary that you are producing on your timeline, you start to really need more expensive equipment, especially computer power and storage and things of that nature. So again, starting small is a great way to start. So yeah, with that, I think what I'll do today is I'm going to just kind of basically center on the process as I have learned over the years, and we'll start with a film that I produced about a local character in Paonia. It's short. I can't remember. I think it's around 4 minutes, between 4 and 5 minutes. And but it gets the point across. And so we'll start with watching this film, and then we'll launch into it from there.
My name is Chris Johnson, and I'm a subsistence hunter and wood gatherer. But I've been using the team of horses for doing both, which is actually pretty high tech compared to what a lot of people have done throughout history. This is an old method, and with a team, they give you a lot more pull than one horse. That's a pretty powerful feeling, driving them two. Everybody wants to drive a chariot. Yeah, a little air on these tires. I'd probably make more sense, if I had a little Kubota tractor, 4-wheel drive with a winch on it, and I could just shut it off and go home on our day. I wouldn't have to wash their shoulders where the collar is, which keeps them from getting sores. And they get pretty cranky sometimes, and you gotta take them down to the lake and get water at least twice a day, and you gotta keep moving some kind of fence along for them, and feed them hay, $10 a bale. They can eat a bale each a day, it adds up. There's our good kids. We're trying to clean up the woods of all the deadfall and some of the dead standing wood, and mitigate fire hazard and the beetles. It does help keep the beetles from spreading if we keep that dead wood cleaned up and what's already infested. But this whole area was so dense with fallen trees that an elk could get through it, but as far as walking through here or riding a horse through here, there's just been no way. Okay. All right, we got a kind of an easy, even start there. Easy. I'm gonna try that big one next. I kind of like these medium-sized draft horses, and a Percheron in particular, because they're a fairly decent ride and pack horse. So my theory is you work, ride, and pack the same horses. So they're, they'll do it all. It makes a lot more sense. If you're going to feed a horse, you might as well be able to work 9 months out of the year instead of just 2 or 3. I end up adopting these horses pretty much here and there, and given to me or dirt cheap. Rocky had some remedial problems. He'd been spooked real bad a few times. Rocky's just a little more ready to go. That's just his temperament. They've got such different temperaments. They weigh about exactly the same, and they got exactly the same size feet, but besides being black and white, they're very different. Yeah, good Rocky. Yeah, you're a little bit full of beans, but you're a good boy, yeah. He wants to please. He's a working son of a gun. If we have time, we're gonna drag a leaner out over there with her, because she's real steady. And they make all sorts of noise coming down. She's done 6 or 8 of them now, and she loves it. Whoop. Okay. There we go. Ooh. We practically limbed it by itself, huh? Yeah, you get tangled up in anything. You get one thumb in the choker chain and they take off before you're ready. They'll drag you on in there by the thumb with one log, and you just might get rolled over 6 or 8 times on the way in. Just a little more. Back, Annie, come on now. She's nice in that she, ooh. My wife and I don't have any kids around. Maybe that's what I kind of look at them as, you know, my critters, you know, some people spend all their extra money on Harley Davidson motorcycles or something else, you know, which is fine, but me, I kind of keep a bunch of hay burners around. Maybe practically it doesn't make that much sense, but I just love it. Come on, back, come on, kiddos. Back. Now that's nice, see, we're right there on the darn log. When you can back that close, you got a good deal.
So that's an example of what I love to do. Personal interest stories, you know, with people, you know, relatively light subject matter. And, you know, a piece like that doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. That was a day of shooting, or, you know, probably actually in the overall scheme of things, maybe 5 or 6 hours of shooting. And then I probably spent two days, you know, to maybe 7 hour days editing that together. So, you know, it's kind of immediate gratification with regard to the film world. So many times films can, you know, take quite a long time to do, but these short formats, they can be simple and they can be done without much doing. Of course, you can take anything to the nth degree and spend, you know, tons of time on a short film like this. But yeah, this is what I do. So unfortunately, there you saw one of his horses, Rocky. Just shortly after this film was made, Rocky was getting out of his trailer and busted up his leg pretty good, like really like bad, and they had to euthanize the horse. It's pretty sad, and I would have tried to, I guess, include that in the film, but it was, you know, by the time the film was made, it was kind of already too late to include that portion. But so let's first talk about pre-production and picking a subject. Best case scenario, you want to pick a subject that you can tell a story with pictures. And you know, that's up to you personally, but it makes much more sense to center in on something that's visually either pleasing or interesting, surrounding action. And even if it's not something that's mesmerizing, if there's action involved, if something is happening, by focusing on that action with your film, that will keep people's interest, at least for 4 minutes, usually, if you can vary up your shots and whatnot. Sometimes I do stories, and in the news world, we call them natural sound packages. And a natural sound package doesn't necessarily have any words attached to it, but sound is very important, even though there are no words. Sound can tell a story without words. And so if your subject matter, if your film that you're looking to do maybe is light on visuals, but strong on sound, well, that's a good recipe. When it comes to film, I personally don't weigh visuals over sound necessarily. I think they're both equally important. Sound, sometimes even more so. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking. If you have something in mind that you know, a subject matter, a story that you want to tell, sound and visuals, sound and pictures, they carry equal weight, and sometimes one more than the other. It does, you know, it's not necessarily all about pictures, although, you know, pictures do matter. And so with regards to telling a story, when we do films, when we choose to tell a story about something with words and pictures, with pictures and sound, the filmmaker always has in their head what the story is going to be. And I kind of want to get it into your head that you need to stay open, that the story you have in your head is many, many times not the story that gets told, is not the story that ends up being the end story that's told. And so you need to stay open to your vision being changed by what you witness, and almost expect that to happen, because I can't tell you how many times that I've gone into a situation expecting to tell a story and something completely different happens, and you need to be able to change gears and be like, okay, this is the story. That I thought that was the story. Now this is the story. And that's, you do that by listening to your subjects that you're interviewing, the subjects that you've involved with your story. That's what you're there to do, is to witness as a filmmaker. And many times, you know, I know some of you are here because you have an organization that you want to get the word out about, or you have a personal project, and that's fine. But even then, you know, you need to be open, and when speaking with consulting with other people in your realm, you know, in your you know, the particular subject that you're going after, it's really good to get additional input from other people, not just you, because your story will expand and get better. You know, the more you know, the better, and especially the more people that you bring into the fold when you're trying to tell a story. And this kind of leads me to kind of the next aspect of telling a story is passion and knowledge. Is you being an expert on something, does that make you a better filmmaker concerning that subject? Say that you are, you know, you were a professional jog trainer. Are you the best person to tell that story? Many times I would contend no. Just because you're an expert on something doesn't mean that you are the best person to tell that story. And so keep that in mind. You know, if you've just got something that you want to get out there, a story that you want to tell with words and pictures, yes, you are a good consultant when it comes to that, and you are a good person to be involved. But get other people involved with telling that story, because the story will get better. So yeah, my point there is, you know, experts in their field don't necessarily make better films. You need to, you know, bring other people in, do additional research, and you know, flesh out your subject matter. And that, you know, all of this just kind of hints to the fact that there are hidden manifestations out there with the stories that you want to tell, and you need to be open to those manifestations happening. And almost always you'll get a pleasant surprise in the end, or as you're doing this work, that really will benefit you in the end. At this point, do any of you have any questions so far with what you've seen or what I've been talking about? Okay. Feel free to chime in and unmute yourself if need be. So next, so that's pre-production. That's scheming, coming up with a subject, being open to the mystery of the story that you want to tell. And I know that seems rather ethereal. Pre-production in reality can be tedious. You need to contact the people that you want to involve with your story and flesh out where you're going to do things, and where the best pictures can be had, and where the best sound can be had, and all of these things. These are the nuts and bolts of pre-production. But really, pre-production, I think, has more to do, in my opinion, with preparing yourself with what you're about to get into, because it can be heavy. Telling a story and having that story change dramatically can really take some fortitude to go with it, to ride the snake, so to speak. And so with me, and pre-production and preparing to tell the story, that's a lot of what I prepare myself with, beyond the nuts and bolts of figuring out when and where you're going to do things. So with just a bit of a background with the film that you just saw about Chris Johnson. Chris, very interesting character. He actually was born and raised in Taos, New Mexico. Him and his wife, I call it, migrated to the North Fork Valley from Taos, New Mexico on horseback. They just decided that we're gonna take off, find and look for a place to live. So they took off on their horses north from New Mexico, and they ended up in the North Fork Valley. And Chris is a tree trimmer. If you've ever seen him around town, he's a gruff, very interesting character. You sit down and talk to the guy, and your mind will be blown. There's no doubt about it. But anyway, Chris, the reason that I decided, or that this story came about, is Chris asked me to do a video of him and his horse-drawn lumber business. He knew that I did things like this, and we had mutual friends, and he's like, yeah, come on down or come on up to the Grand Mesa and just get some video of me doing this. It's like, okay, and I was just going to kind of do it as a favor. And I got up there and saw what he was doing. I was like, oh man, there's a story to tell here, and it's a story that I think is unique and not a lot of people really could relate to. It would be a fascinating subject matter. And so that's what led to that video of Chris Johnson. And it was fairly easy to pull off for the most part. So this leads us to production and being in the field and shooting your subjects with a camera or a phone. The best methods to use when you're in the field. So first and foremost, equipment. These days, electronic cameras are so crazy powerful that you really can't go wrong with equipment, especially when you're just wanting to tell a story about in short form like this. So at the very least, you know, cameras these days, phones or dedicated cameras, can do a lot of things. What I do, I use a kit that allows me to plug in a wireless microphone. And I rarely, if ever, have somebody helping me in the field. I'm a one-man band. Back in the day, that's kind of how I made my money. I was able to do a lot of different things and pull it off in such a way that, you know, many people weren't supposed to be, or didn't need to be hired by a production company or whoever was hiring me to tell a story. I could go in light by myself with a light equipment kit and pull this off. And so these days, what I use is just a very small mirrorless DSLR camera, or a mirrorless camera is what they refer to these days. It's a little Panasonic GH5 camera. It's not a cheap camera. They go for, you know, a couple thousand for a camera body plus lenses. But I can plug in a wireless microphone to the camera. And wireless microphones, I think, are really a godsend to one-man bands and documentary filmmaking. You know, if you have a crew, you can dedicate, you know, sound people with boom mics and so on and so forth, and get decent sound. But wireless microphones, I think, are just an amazing tool to get sound. And so with this Chris Johnson story, I put a mic on Chris Johnson, let him work, let him do his thing. He's constantly talking to his horses. The mic is picking up natural sound of the horses, you know, trotting and hoofing and dragging large trees and all that. And it's a treasure trove. You know, a wireless mic is a treasure trove, provides, you know, amazing elements to your film. And so while you can pull off films using your phone and you know, smaller point and shoot style cameras, what will suffer when you use a more simple equipment like that is your sound. One way of getting around the lack of sound capabilities with your camera equipment is to buy a separate sound recorder. And they're relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of cameras, but it is an additional piece of equipment. It doesn't hook directly to your camera. It almost, you know, it's a more complicated method of doing things because it's just more equipment to deal with. But with a wireless microphone, with a wireless lav, that's what I'm speaking into right now. It's just, you know, many times you can make it invisible. So it's not obtrusive in the film. The wireless mic that can be plugged into a camera is really an amazing kit to be able to use. So that's, you know, that's what I've used for years and years and years. And it covers the vast majority of what you need done. And so any questions thus far on production and just kind of the simple equipment that I use?
Yeah. What wireless mic looks like?
I use, yeah, the wireless mic that I use is made by Sennheiser. It's a EW100 G2. They no longer make this. I've had this mic for geez, probably going on 10 years now. It's always better when, you know, if you know that you're going to be dedicating a lot of your time to making films, you know, more than just one film. In my opinion, it's good to buy equipment once. So, you know, if you're gonna buy a wireless, you know, spend $500 on a wireless kit, and it will last you a long time. This kit, you know, it's not a full-on professional kit, which those are more in the $1,200 on up for a wireless mic. But it does the job. It's, it's made out of metal, and it has good sound quality. And so I paid, in the neighborhood of, I think, $500 for this 10 years ago. So that's, is a wireless mic, is it the same as a lavalier? No, not really. So a wireless mic, I could actually hook a wireless mic up to a handheld microphone. So a lot of rock stars use wireless mics on stage, even though they're speaking into a microphone. A lavalier can be plugged into. So a lavalier is basically just referring to this little tiny mic, tiny, that in turn can be plugged into your wireless transmitter. So this is the wireless transmitter, and there's a identical receiver that is attached to my camera right now.
And Jay, so that will basically take the input from the mic and bring it right into the audio that's attached to the video you're shooting, right? As if it were your camera onboard mic, but it's the high quality from the lab or from the remote. Okay.
Correct.
And then you're not dealing with like trying to sync up the video with sound that you recorded on another box or something.
Correct. Yeah, that's all done for you. You just have to, most cameras these days that are in the upper level of consumer cameras have some sort of a microphone input, but that's something to look for if you're, in the market for such a kit. Certainly make sure your camera can accept a wireless mic, and the input is an 1/8 inch jack, similar to your typical 1/8 inch headphone jack, and it's not robust. You have to be careful with these little wires and whatnot, especially when you're hooking them up to people like Chris Johnson that are driving horses and whatnot. But it's better than the more professional equipment uses XLR mics for the most part, XLR inputs that are much more robust and tend to last longer. But anyhow, yeah, that's the story there. Any other questions about equipment or mics or anything like that?
I did have a question about just if there are any special tools for helping you organize a project. We're talking about short things, but even, you mentioned several hours out in the field with Chris and then a couple of days of editing. Do you have, besides just a paper and pen where you sort of sketch things out, are there tools or ways that you can organize the projects as they're coming together that may be easier than just writing it down somehow? Is there applications or something like that?
The answer from my from where I come from, the way I've been doing things forever, is no. I don't worry about that. It's tough enough being in the field and trying to keep track of things. At least for me in particular, it's tough enough just trying to wrangle what's going on around you. And so and this is kind of coming up next in the next segment, which, let me see if we might be ready to move on to the next segment here. Let me just look real quick. Yeah, we'll get on to that. But the answer is no, but by way of yes. So I'll get into that after I close up production here real quick. The sound and interviews, and mainly we're going to be talking about interviews here. I almost always, if it's possible, I will mic my subject or subjects and sit down with them or stand with them. But I get into an environment where we can concentrate on each other and really not be interrupted by what's going on around us, in order to tell stories, be personal. Um, and So I almost, if I can, I almost always will sit people down and interview them in order to include them in the film. But I almost always as well, if there's an opportunity, I put the wireless mic on them and I let them do their thing, whatever that thing is. With Chris, he was a chatty Cathy. And when I see chatty Cathys, I'm like, oh, love it. It's the hardest thing in the world is to interview somebody that doesn't naturally talk or doesn't like to talk, because that can kill a story. Really, quite honestly, if somebody isn't willing to open up about what it is that they're supposed to be talking about, that's tough. That takes skill to get people to open up. And so as part of pre-production, picking your interviews, you kind of need to flesh them out. If you don't know somebody ahead of time, and maybe they live way far away, you need to get on the phone with them and figure out, are they wordy? Are they not? And you almost need to kind of try to take that into consideration as to what they're going to be adding to the film. But this leads me up to the soundbite. And so the soundbite can really have negative connotations. The soundbite is something that I kind of have trouble explaining a soundbite in even terms, but essentially a soundbite is a piece of sound that can be used, whether it's words or natural sound, that either with or without pictures associated with it can tell a story. Yes, when you ask somebody a question and their answer is yes, that's not going to tell a story. That is not a soundbite. And so when you are interviewing people, you have to ask questions in such a way that they can't possibly say yes or no. And there are certainly tricks to do this. You're interviewing somebody, Chris Johnson, for instance. Chris, tell me about your time, training horses, and inevitably, if your subject has something to say and is wordy, off he goes, talks and talks and talks, and in that time, there's going to be other things that come up with his answers, and it's up to you. I mean, at that point, if you're organized and can pay attention, you can jot down, okay, 1 or 2 word reminders that will lead you to your next question in your interview. But by avoiding those yes and no questions, you will get a much, much better story that can be told, and a much better ammunition to tell your story for your film. And so, yeah, it's a trick. It's an art, really, to be able to ask people questions that get rid of the yes and the no answer. And so, tell me about it. Things of that nature are really, you need to really carefully frame your questions in that way. And sometimes you even need to, redirect people. Don't be afraid to stop the interview and say, can you explain that a little bit more? Can you explain that a little better? And don't be afraid to say that a couple times when it comes to, asking people questions, getting them to tell their story. This is the time to do it. The cutting room floor and the edit booth is the time to flesh all this stuff out, and that's different. It's much more time consuming, and we're going to get into that next. But if you can you know, if mentally you can keep tabs of what these people are talking about, great. If you're not mental like that, have a little notebook, a little reporter's notebook, and take notes. And so when your subjects are talking about you know, the story that they have to tell, they're going to be describing things in the story that you're going to want to get pictures of. There's nothing worse than somebody talking about something super interesting, but not having the pictures to back that up. And so when people are, you know, telling you their story, and you know, they're talking about visual things, well, you know, write those things down. Write down the things that feasibly you can get cover video of. You know, whether it's, you know, when we're talking about the Chris Johnson story, you know, whether it's you know, close-ups of logs, or close-ups of when he was talking about getting his thumb stuck in the gear and getting your thumb ripped off. Well, you know, try to focus in on some of the things that he's doing that can help further tell that story. So again, you know, with Ben answering or asking the question, you know, what tools do you have that can help you out in the field? Really, it's a little reporter's notebook and a pencil. And, you know, to be quite honest, I don't use those things. I've just I'm on the hunt for that type of those types of tidbits when I'm interviewing people. I'm like, ooh, all right, there's something, and it goes up there, and I can keep it in the moment. Most times, not all the time, you know, almost always. There's not a worse feeling than when you're editing your story and you're like, I forgot to get a shot of that would have been perfect. Can I go back and do it? You know, most times you can't go back and do it. You can, people try to fake it, and people can fake it successfully. But yeah, so, you know, those are the pitfalls of, you know, making films and being able to include everything that people are talking about in your film, at least the more important things. So again, I'll kind of close off the interview and portion of it with be very open and remain open to changing directions of the story, because, you know, it's not about you telling the story so much as it is getting the true essence of a story that somebody else is telling, and that's when you really get down to the nitty-gritty of storytelling with words and pictures, moving pictures. All right, so next we'll get into, we're getting kind of close to the end here. I hope might go over a little bit. So as opposed to taking questions now, I'm just going to try to get through the last part, which is editing on the timeline. And so Ben, my method for really wrangling all this information that you're taking in electronically in the field, I leave that, I don't worry about that until I go onto my timeline. And so the timeline, just for y'all, the timeline is the non-linear editing timeline. I will pull up right now what a timeline typically looks like. Dun, 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 dun. Where did you go? Come on, Zoom. Bear with me, folks, just for a minute here. Oh, crap. Okay, there we go. Share screen. Okay, everybody still with me? Yeah. Okay, so are y'all seeing this crazy looking multi-window picture of Adobe Premiere Pro? Are y'all seeing that? So this is the timeline here. This is what your video, this is what your short film looks like on a nonlinear edit system. And so the first thing that I do when I come home, I've got a huge pile of video after getting over the panic and the dread that I've got, you know, whatever, 50 hours or 20 hours of video to go through. Is you just start plowing into your interviews and separating time, separating sound bites. And it's a tedious thing. Here's what one looks like with Chris Johnson. And I just go through and I pick out the complete sentences. I pick out the time, the complete thoughts. I pick out really good pieces of sound that the horses had make, and I put them into separate bins. And so at this point, I'm starting to pare down all the sound, and I basically build the film on the timeline based on sound. And it's an age-old way that I learned in the news business, is you lay down what's called the A roll, and then you cover that with B roll. So A roll is your sound. It's what makes up the actual storytelling portion of the film. And then the B roll is usually pictures. And these are things that, your wide, your medium, your close-up shots, all these things that you lay over the sound in order to really make it a cohesive piece of art. The B-roll, the sound, these are the elements of your video, of your film, that you can really get creative with, as long as you're able to tell a story with your sound. That really frees you up. It's kind of like it's like a making a building, the foundation of your film. And again, this is certainly my opinion. This isn't the end all be all way of making a short film. This is just something that has worked for me, and I know works for a lot of other people. The foundation is your sound, and you're telling a story with audio, and then you come back and you face the film. You give the film a face with your B-roll and all the different things that make it visually pleasing. So depending on how complicated your film is, you might have a couple different bins of sound bites. You might have 3 different interviews, 3 different bins, separating out the sound bites into cohesive thoughts. They might be 3 or 4 second sound bites. They might be 20-second sound bites. But let's see what I got here going on for Chris.
Someday she's ornery and wants to fight. Like she was trying to bite him here. She's biting. He's about 16 years old and has done quite a few different things, including pull a sleigh.
So is that audio coming through? Are you guys able to hear that? Correct. Okay. Yeah. So that's, those are brief examples of sound bites. And, my timeline here is just full of jump cuts of sound bites. And then when I start to tell the story, I have what I usually term as a final timeline, and that's when I start laying down bit by bit your story. And it's kind of, it's a very stream of conscious thing for me personally. Some people map these things out to the nth degree. And it's, it's a different style of making films. But I'm very organic with how I tell a story, and I try to pattern it after, what the subjects are actually, speaking about. And so, when your timeline starts to be fleshed out, then, you've got these stacks of audio and video, multiple tracks of audio, multiple tracks of video. And this is where the more tracks that you have in your timeline, here I'm using Adobe Premiere Pro. When you start stacking up, more than 5 tracks of audio and video, you start needing a much more powerful computer with a very powerful graphics card. And you have to keep that in mind when if you've got the idea to really have a complicated story to tell. A lot of times you could be limited by the hardware that you're employing, particularly the type of computer that you're using. I'm sorry, whatever nonlinear editing system you're using, whether you're using Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere. There's a number of other ones out there. Some are free, some are not. iMovie. There's even apps for your phone, and I've not gotten into that so much myself, but there's entire movies that have been made with phones that you really have to respect them for being able to do that. Okay, well, we are at the end. We are over at this point. I don't blame you if you have to take off and you have other things to do in your day. But any questions thus far, as we're kind of wrapping things up here?
Yeah, Jay, just one thing is, like, as an artist, it's hard to know when things are done. You could always tweak it, you could always adjust it, you could always switch the music out. But is there something that you find helps you consistently, like, approach the pinching it all off or closing the portal or wrapping things up, especially because it's challenging to tell a story in a short amount of time? What do you find helpful for, like, all right, I got to end it, here's how I begin the end?
Well, certainly you're many times your physical, you're trying to stay within your physical timeline, 4 minutes. And so, I mean, that in and of itself is like, okay, here I am. We need to wrap this up. And so when I'm pulling sound bites, I will, and I'm putting, separating sound bites into bins on my timeline. I will keep the sound bites that are, more summing up of things, summing up of stories towards the end of that bin. And I'm like, okay, these are the bites that I could basically end on. And, as an artist, you're kind of choosing, there's bias, filmmaking is certainly biased. It's super difficult not to be biased because you're so immersed in a story. And so, it's kind of up to you to really set the tone of how things end. And the beginnings of the end, as you put it, can really take place in your interview. You want to be able to kind of direct your subject as to, addressing what you would think the end of the story should or would be. And that might come in the form of just a direct question of, well, how do you see this ending? What have you learned You know, what's the end result? What do you hope will happen in the end? And, you know, all of these things point towards either, you know, um, an open-ended ending, something that really just can be, you know, interpreted widely, or, you know, it's a wrap, you know, type ending. So hopefully that answers your question. You know, it's endings can be tricky in that regard. Sometimes you'll get to the end of your project and like, what, how best to do this? And that's where kind of your artistic merit comes into play sometimes, and you kind of just have to go with what feels right. Yeah, we'll kind of leave it at that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You touched on it a little bit, but I always have trouble figuring out when to stop research, partly because you can do endless research. When to stop doing the research and when to jump in and start shooting. I'm always afraid I'm going to like misrepresent my subject in some way or
Yeah.
shape or form, so I end up just reading and doing way too much, trying to understand it, and I have a problem just going out and shooting. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to hear maybe from you, like, how do you know when you know enough about a subject to go out and start?
Yeah, how do you know enough about a subject? Well, you know, I touched, you're right, I touched on the fact that experts don't necessarily make better filmmakers. And so, you know, I go into a lot of these things really just wanting to get to know somebody, someplace, something. And as long as I'm personally educated and enlightened, and or enlightened in some way, I call that good. And you know, certainly your time frame, the overall length of your film factors into this tremendously, because you can only fit so much into a 4 or 5 minute long film. You know, if you're dealing with a feature length film, then, well, geez, you've got a lot more time to play with these things, and possibly insert them. For me, I won't delve into things that I can't necessarily get pictures of, and I kind of limit it to that. Um, so, you know, you might have somebody talking about something and getting very emotional about what they're talking about, but you can't possibly get pictures of what they're talking about. Well, just that emotion alone is enough, at least for me personally, to convey that story. Um, and so I think, you know, in a nutshell, you know, for me, I don't include uh, subject matter in my videos that I can't necessarily get good pictures of feasibly in some way, shape, or form. That's kind of my fallback when it comes to, you know, even cutting. Well, I try not to ever cut anybody off when they're going in depth about what they're passionate about. But certainly, you know, if we're going down a path that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, well, we'll change directions and try to go down another path. And again, this falls into the bias of filmmaking. You know, it's very difficult to be unbiased and be an observer. I really respect people that have those skills, and I've witnessed people that can do that in their life. A lot of times, these are the people that have very little ego attached with what they're trying to do. And boy, it's a fine line, you know, when you're passionate about something, a lot of you is going to be in that. And I really respect filmmakers that can pull it off and not have that intense bias come through when they're telling their story, when they can really separate themselves and direct the story and let themselves be directed by that and follow it and be there with their camera. That's the ultimate, in my opinion, for when we're talking about documentary filmmaking and trying to tell a story. Any other questions? I do have, I don't know if you guys want, I've got another example of my work that's not necessarily a documentary, so to speak. It's somebody that wanted me to tell a story about their organization. I know there was at least one person here that wanted to tell a story of what they're involved with, which isn't a pure form of filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, but it is filmmaking. Would you all want to see that? It's it's another 4 or 5 minute story. Okay. Let me pull it up here. So this, just a sec. Okay. Let's see here. Which one? Okay, so I had somebody, call me up several years ago. They wanted me to tell the story of what this organization does. The organization is the Uncompahgre Watershed Partnership. They're a nonprofit based in Ridgeway. And this is all about the Uncompahgre River and what they're trying to do to preserve it.
The Uncompahgre comes from the Ute word akapaharer. Akapaharer means red water, muddy water, or a water that is slow moving. My people used to live up and down this valley since early times, hundreds of years ago, camping during the winter times and living here throughout the winter because of the water, the wood, and the grass for the ponies. It was just the right place for them to be. During the summer months, they would abandon the river bottoms for the mountains and follow the deer and the elk and animals that gave them life and sustained them.
It's a thread, it's an artery that's very important to the county.
It is a lifeblood here, and we have to keep it that way. I mean, it's our legacy to make sure that that happens.
The Uncompahgre and its tributaries really kind of are the reason we all live here in one way or the other. They support the lifestyles that we all hold dear, supports the ag, the open space, supports recreation, whether it be flatwater boating or fishing or fly fishing or rafting or kayaking.
There's no doubt there's a direct correlation between the economic value as it relates to recreating on the river. Whether it's another night's stay or a meal at the restaurant or gas at the pump.
The Uncompahgre River is only really a healthy river in parts, meaning at times the flow is healthy, it's adequate to support some needs, but certainly it has major water quality impacts from historic mining practices in its headwater regions.
Great Copper Gulch was listed as impaired for, I think, copper and iron, low pH. And so we're removing that waste rock material to prevent migration of the waste rock downstream and any seepage of metals out of the waste rock into the creek.
UWP's role in our community and its role for the river really is sort of this one-stop shop for community information about the river.
We try to be open to everybody's input, and the major users and stakeholders in our watershed include miners, they include ranchers, recreational community, fishermen, and just citizens that are interested in hiking and biking and exploring our watershed.
To pull together good ideas, to pull together creative people. That's what UWP is really there for. We need to have a place where interested parties like local community members or businesses or mining operations or other nonprofits or government organizations can turn to ask, can you get this done? Can you remedy this problem?
It's about the human connection, really, I think ultimately, in one way or another, we all share a common value to protect or at least respect our resources, and that's what these partnerships are about.
I'm sure that everyone in this county in some way must come to realize that they should know how important the Uncompahgre is to every one of them.
Water is life here, and it's worth taking care of and preserving and using it in a way that you don't waste it.
So an example there of, there's a message that the organization wants to get out there. I certainly, work with them closely on getting that message out there. But there's a fair amount of documentary filmmaking style in something like this. You still want to make it visually pleasing. You still want to cover any audio that you have with the things that are being spoken about. And so you're still mentally taking notes of when people are speaking about these things, you're going to go in and try to get pictures of that if at all possible. And so yeah, that one, that took several weeks of different locations and different interviews and whatnot, and certainly probably a solid week of editing, just because there was so much material to go through in the end. Yeah. Any comments or questions thus far?
Hey, Jay, let's go ahead and do your final remarks and move to final questions.
Okay. Yeah, I don't, in terms of final remarks, I encourage you all to not, in the film world, there can be a lot of egos and a lot of people, speaking highly or having, a lot of opinions about the equipment that you're using and things of that nature. And don't, if you haven't gotten involved with film, if it's something that you really think you might want to get involved with, all that really matters is, you get a camera, you get a edit system or a piece of software that you can edit film with on your computer, and just do it. Just tell the story. That's really what it boils down to, is telling a story however you can do it. Don't get caught up with how you should, with what equipment you should. Yeah, just make something happen and follow through with it, doing from beginning to end, get the project out there. So many projects can end up on the, on your hard drive and never see the light of day. And, what a shame that is. Finish what you start, get it out there, share it, YouTube. These days, it's so amazing what we can do because of the technology that's available to us, the price point of this technology. back in the day, I used to carry around $100,000 camera in the back of my car, and that camera these days won't hold a candle to the $2,000 camera that I shoot all my stuff with. And so, you know, what it's enabled more everyday people, you know, this technology, and to really pull off some beautiful things. You know, technologically, they have made it easier to use this equipment and make it more accessible to people, and kind of democratized filmmaking in a way. And that's a good thing. So I encourage you all to certainly, you know, make something happen, tell a story however you can, and certainly if you have any questions, you can contact me, get a hold of the theater, and they can contact me. I'm might be on the board of directors. Is that happening or not?
You should keep an eye out in your inbox from Mr. President. But we
right.
had a really lovely discussion, and you are now talking to one of the very soon to be board members of the Friends of the Paradise Theater. So
okay. Yeah, right on. Yeah, it'll be super great to be involved with the theater, and I'm totally here if any of you have further questions that come up and want to get involved in anything with regards to what we've been talking about today, and happy to help you all out. And thanks for coming today. Thanks for listening.
yeah, thank you, Jay. And anyone here, this is the time to put into practice what you just learned, and make some movies and submit them. The film festival will be amazing because of you. And thank you, Brendan, again for heading that up. It's going to be really exciting.
Yep. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for everything.
We had one question in the chat here, Jay. Someone wanted to know if you use extra lighting or reflectors in your interviews.
Generally, no. Generally, no. I do have a light kit. I carry a light kit if I know that I'm going to be interviewing people indoors. Indoors can be problematic, but in general, you know, with documentary films, at least the types of things that I do that are you know, kind of somewhat fly by the seat of your pants, really just following the snake here and there. And with me, the nature of what I do being kind of a one-man band, it can be very difficult to, you know, use a reflector while you're trying to film somebody and interview them at the same time. Light is a different story. If you need to throw a light on somebody because you're just in a dark corner of a house or something, that's one thing. But long answer short, I do carry a light kit with me just in case, but 95% of the time, I never break it out.
And anyone else, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to type it into the chat, I'll read it out loud for you.
Did you all, you know, generally get, this is one of the nervous things that I have, you know, with trying to cover a broad subject matter such as this. Do you all felt like you at least learned something and maybe, you know, can carry forward with some of the ideas that I gave today? I see some thumbs up here and there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Don't stress about over-organizing it beforehand. Allow the thing to guide itself in a way. You give yourself up to the process a little bit and not try to micromanage how it's all going to turn out.
Exactly.
Maybe don't stress too much about your equipment, more about the story, and good sound will make a good film. It's kind of like if the crust is bad on a pizza, it kind of ruins the pizza. If the sound is bad on a film, it sort of makes it hard to digest the film too. So
right.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And it gives us a lot of direction in terms of what we want to learn more about in the future. I imagine some people here, you know, have a lot to learn about video editing. I certainly do too. But I think if you've never played with something beyond iMovie, you can get a free trial for a lot of these more powerful things. And there's 1.5 million YouTube videos about everything you want to learn. So it's out there if you have the time to delve into it.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Yeah, nonlinear editing you can really get into the weeds with nonlinear editing, but yeah, like you said, there is an answer on YouTube for everything that you might want to do with regards to any one of these pieces of software, and it's all free to you. And you know, that's a wonderful thing.
Someone wanted to know, if you use clips from a news broadcast, do you need to get permission to use it as B-roll?
Yes. Yeah. Short answer is yes. If you've gotten it from any sort of a private source that's branded, you generally do need to do that. Now, if you're not making money from it, and you're using it, you know, just in a purely informational sense, I say go for it. Quite honestly, my threshold is, if any money is changing hands with what it is that you're doing, whether you're hired to do something or whether you expect to sell copies or make money on YouTube with hits, with views and all that type of thing. If money is changing hands, you definitely need to get copyright releases for any of those copyrighted materials, which a news source is copyrighted material. So yeah, if you're just doing it for yourself, for a hobby, you don't care if YouTube demonetizes, I forget what they call it. They take away the money making aspect from your YouTube channel. If that's okay with you, then yeah, just go ahead and do whatever I say. But making money is a different story.
Jay, do you have any favorite sources for like royalty-free music? You know, it's lovely that, let's just say, our former president was using some Rolling Stones without permission, and that's a terrible example to set. But for those of us who don't know the Rolling Stones personally, are there places where you can consistently find some decent enough music without having to pay $1,000 for a 30-second clip or something?
Yeah, I go to friends first. And over the years, I've certainly, you know, made a lot of musician friends, and you know, I have a lot of friends that I know just have tracks or you know, small little sections of music sitting around on hard drives, and I'll just be like, hey, you know, I kind of need something that's kind of like this and this, acoustic, happy, sad, whatever. And so first and foremost, I ask friends. And I might even, you know, if I'm being paid for, if I'm being hired to do something like the Uncompahgre Watershed Partnership, I will, you know, throw down a little bit of money to friends if they're going to provide me with a music clip. So for instance, the Chris Johnson video you saw, I talked to my friend Bill Powers, who was a member of Sweet Sunny South here in the Paonia's early days of rock and roll ness. And we've kept close tabs, and I always hit him up if I need a little blurb here and there, and he's happy to oblige as long as you give credit. That's certainly anything. If you're not going to pay anybody for anything that you do, you know, in terms of copyrighted material, especially music, always credit the music in the end. You know, that is, if you haven't, you know, purchased it and don't need to do that. If no money is taking place, give credit where credit is due. So beyond friends, if you just Google royalty-free music, there's a number of places that pop up, and I've used a number of places, and I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I am not coming up with a specific one. They kind of change over the years. You know, some have come into the fold, some have dropped out of the fold. But Google royalty-free music, and you can usually find clips. And I've had good luck with finding decent clips. Also, archive.org can a lot of times have like old-timey music that's fallen out of copyright, the whole grandfathered copyright laws. And so, you know, sometimes old-timey music will work. Also, at beyondarchive.org, what's the other website? I'm having a brain fart. There's another website that has a ton of music. Oh man. Sound. Oh, it's escaping me. Sound. Yeah.
Soundstripe?
What'd you say?
Is it Soundstripe?
No, not Soundstripe. SoundCloud. SoundCloud. So, you know, SoundCloud, there's so much independently produced music there. And some of that I think is labeled as community access. There's a specific term for it, public domain. But then some of it's not. But if you find a piece of music that's like, you know, oh, that's killer, I want to use that piece of music, you can contact them. You know, SoundCloud, all the authors there, you can contact them and just be like, you know, hey, I'm making this podunk little film. I dig your music. Would you mind if I used your piece of music and credited you in the film? And you know, most times people be into that. Friends first. A lot of independent artists out there that, you know, they just want independent musicians. They want to get their music out there. So that's who I always try to hit up when I'm looking for music.